Welcome to a ride on the outside. MMA is full of people on the inside, but what about the ones that watch from beyond? Welcome to the MMA Outsiders with Tom Albano and Zain Bando on the Empty the Bench Podcast Network.
Welcome back. The MMA Outsiders is back in your life for episode 68, presented by Wolves. I am Zain Bando, and to my left is a co-host of a different kind, because that's right, it's our newly minted producer, Pat Danna, who's filling in for Tom Albano this week as had some scheduling issues, but we were able to get this show in, and we have a whole lot to get to this week in the aftermath of UFC 297 that took place in Canada. But before we get to that, we want to remind you that this podcast is brought to you by Wolves and also brought to you by the Empty the Bench Podcast Network, as we are just approaching around 700 subscribers. So please leave a like if you're new, and please hit that subscribe button, and also be sure to hit the notification bells so you can see all of our great shows and content from all of our different podcast hosts across all the different sports. You can also check out great blogs at etbpodcast.com from some of our contributors and so much more. For those of you who don't know me by now, my name is Zain Bando. I'm a staff writer for bjpen.com and also a Sunday news writer for MMA Knockout, and Pat is also a writer for Combat Sports UK, so you could check his stuff out there. You could follow him at Danna MMA, and you can follow me at Bando99. And of course, one final note about Wolf Spreads for those of you who don't know how to play. It's been our 5 to 6 month sponsored app now, specifically around the NFL, but it's being expanded to all different sports. So for those of you who don't know how it works, you get 2,000 fantasy dollars. You have to use at least 1,000, and of course, it kind of teaches you by gambling a bit, where if you use all your fantasy dollars and who can profit the most in all your picks, that person wins for that week. And then obviously, as you know, you don't risk losing your house in the process, because of course it's fake money. So with that out of the way, we can finally get the show started. Pat, we have a lot to get into tonight, don't we?
I mean, man, it was a big past week in MMA. A lot of different headlines, a lot of big news to discuss, man. I mean, just crazy. And I want to say thank you again for having me on the show. I know I'm filling in for Tom this week. He couldn't make it. He'll still be here. Don't worry. This isn't a permanent change, but I just wanted to say thank you, and I can't wait.
Oh yeah, for sure. Anytime we're happy to have you, and we're happy to have you along for the ride as part of the MMA Outsiders team. So we'll get started getting right into our show topics, because we have a lot to get to, starting with UFC 297 that took place this past weekend in Toronto, Ontario, Canada, where we had two news in the main event. Of course, we had Dricus du Plessis edging out a very close split decision win over now former champion Sean Strickland, and we had Raquel Pennington knocking off Mayra Bueno Silva in a very lackluster decision win to win the women's bantamweight title. So I guess before we dig into the top two fights on the card, what were your overall impressions of the event itself, the whole fight build-up, and just kind of everything in between?
I mean, the entire week was definitely helped out with a lot of the controversy going on and everything. It definitely got a lot more eyes on the event. And I think that the main event lived up to the hype. I know I saw some people saying that it was a boring fight or it wasn't a great fight. I thought it was a war. I thought both men put it all on the line. I mean, the co-main event was a little bit lackluster, like you said, but I thought the main event was great. And I thought the card definitely delivered. Maybe not for Canadians, but it delivered.
Yeah, I mean, I thought it delivered as well. For those of you who don't know, on the men's side of things, the men went 0-7. I think the female side fared a little bit better, but it still just wasn't good enough. But yeah, overall, getting into this main event and the stakes of the fight, I mean, you obviously had two of the best middleweights in the world. On one side, you had Dricus du Plessis, who had been dominating the international scene for several years and finally became a household name after a very nice knockout of Robert Edgar last year, so that obviously got him the title shot. And then, of course, you had Sean Strickland going into enemy territory to beat Israel Adesanya and spoil what would have been in a massive fight, which we're going to get into in a little bit, temporarily spoil a potential massive fight between Israel Adesanya and Dricus du Plessis. But this was one of those fights where you didn't really know what to expect. You just knew that based on what took place at UFC 296 and leading into UFC 297 that this fight week was going to be very, very, very interesting. I guess let's start all the way back at the beginning of the week. When you saw them exchanging pleasantries on Embedded, were you surprised about that? And did you ever think that there would be a twist? Like there was just 48 hours away, either by the time we ended up getting to media day and everything that went down there, because I think that from what happened between Monday and Wednesday was very different than what inspired on Thursday or Friday, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. I was definitely a little bit surprised to see them being so cordial. I think it was right after both of them landed in Toronto. There was a lot of like friendliness there, you know. They walked up to each other, gave each other a little hug, you know, we're talking to the girlfriend and stuff. I mean, it was just not something you'd expect from two guys who just got into a brawl in the crowd that have been talking all this crap to each other. But I mean, it's not the craziest thing. MMA is a wild sport, and we've seen guys hash out and then settle their differences not long after. But now it seems like their differences have started up once again because they're now going back and forth on social media with each other. I mean, throughout the fight week, it seemed to definitely calm down. It seemed that they were fairly friendly towards each other, and then now after the fight, it's gotten a little bit more hostile again.
Yeah, for sure. So just in terms of the fight itself, it obviously was a very close fight. It was a very back and forth fight. I think there's this heavy debate as to how the runs were scored. For me personally, I did score the fight for du Plessis. I thought he won 2, 3, and 4, with Strickland winning 1 and 5. How did you score the fight? What did you think of the fight overall? And did you think at any point, based on how du Plessis' boxing got better as the fight went on, that maybe that late finish was coming, because there were a couple of times where I thought he was going to be able to get him out of there and he wasn't able to do it. What did you think of the fight overall? Do you think the fight lived up to the hype, and do you think the judges got it right?
I definitely think the fight lived up to the hype. I mean, like I said, those two men put it all on the line out there. You could tell both men were worn down. They were beaten up. They had went back and forth. I mean, I thought it was a great fight. I also did agree with you that Dricus did win a 3-2 decision. I thought he won rounds 2, 3, and 4. I rewatched it today and had the same conclusion that Dricus won rounds 2, 3, and 4. Very close fight that could have went either way. And you can't be mad for anyone that scored that fight for Sean Strickland. I just think that it was an extremely close fight. But there's been a lot of controversy over the decision, and I'm honestly a little surprised, because in fights that close, you gotta just understand it's a coin flip. You know, either guy could have walked away with a big win that night, and it just turned that the judges thought Dricus won. I don't think it was a bad decision, and I think the fight definitely lived up to the hype.
Yeah, I think anybody screaming robbery, there's two conclusions I'll make to that. Number one, you have not watched enough high level mixed martial arts championship fights to come to that immediate conclusion. And number two, you clearly don't understand the scoring criteria works, because if you were to call that a robbery, then the whole scoring criteria, which gets scrutinized anyway for its own various reasons, then then I think you would be soundly mistaken to think otherwise. So no, I thought that the cards were right, and
Mhm.
sometimes in those championship fights you have to make a judgment call, and not every judgment call is correct. But I don't know. I think, now it leads to the question of, okay, maybe in the future, do you start scoring fights holistically, and do you just eliminate the 10-point must system? But I guess that's either here nor there now, because it's been so traditional for so many years that unless enough commissions speak up about it, then I don't think anything's going to change anytime soon. So nonetheless, Dricus du Plessis becomes the fourth UFC champion from Africa, the first UFC champion out of South Africa, and definitely someone who ignited that region for sure, and a potential UFC Africa event. Well, it looked dead in the water for a little while after Francis Ngannou left the promotion, and after Israel Adesanya briefly lost his championship for a little bit. I now think with du Plessis winning the middleweight title, I think it's a South Africa event. It's more likely than not either this year or early 2025. But overall, I thought it was a very solid main event, and unfortunately, though, it was in contrast to what was the co-main event, which was Raquel Pennington versus Mayra Bueno Silva, which was not getting the same level of attention as the main event, of course. So I guess, what were your impressions of that fight? Did you think that Pennington was going to win? Because I had originally picked her to beat Mayra Bueno Silva, and you just think overall, because this is sort of how I feel, well, do you think that Silva simply just didn't do what he said she was going to do? Because I just think she got outclassed the entire fight, and the fight wasn't even close. What did you think?
I mean, it seemed like Bueno Silva had nothing other than a couple good submission attempts during that fight. I mean, throughout the entire fight, there wasn't even much boxing on her side. I think there might have been a couple nice punches in the clinch that she landed, but other than a couple submission attempts that did get fairly close, she had nothing for Raquel. Raquel Pennington, from start to finish, really won that fight fairly clearly. She was able to just dominate her in every single area, even on the ground as the fight progressed. You saw Mayra Bueno Silva start to gas and gas and gas as the fight got later, and she looked like a completely different fighter by the end of that fight. She was laying on her back, she wasn't getting up, and she didn't look like she belonged in a championship fight, to be completely honest. Mayra Bueno Silva did not live up to all the talk that she made in the lead up to this fight. And now Raquel Pennington, after all these years, finally wins a UFC championship. I think it's a beautiful story. I think she definitely deserved it. And I know some people are upset with the fact that she's a champion, but at the same time, I mean, she's grinded her way back to the top of this weight class, and she deserves it. She really just, every moment that's happening right now is something that she worked towards. So I don't understand how people are sitting here and just trashing her performance and trashing her fight, because she did everything right. That was on Mayra Bueno Silva. That fight was on the fact that fight was lackluster was not on Raquel Pennington.
I'm in 1000% agreement, and I think it'll make the potential huge next challenge for will more than likely be taking on former ultimate fighter competitor in ex winner of the show, Juliana Pena, the former UFC women's bantamweight champion. And I think now that fight just got a whole lot bigger, considering the Pennington just won the belt, and he was talking all that trash in the week leading up that they were fighting for her pretend belt, which I guess she is a rightful claim to make, considering that that injuries have kept her out of that spot. But I guess kind of looking ahead from an early preview perspective, how do you see that fight playing out? And do you think that Pena is going to do what she says she's going to do, which is reclaim her back with ease? Because I think the way that Pennington fought on Saturday leads me to believe that fight might be closer than what people think. What do you think?
It is a close fight. I definitely think that it's a close fight, and either girl, if they show up hot, can win that fight. I would probably lean Raquel Pennington early, just because she's been a lot more active over the past couple of years. Even before Pena got the title shot against Nunes, she wasn't really that active of a fighter. So Raquel's activity and just the fact that she's been in there with some of the best girls in the world. I know she's fought Nunes and she didn't get the win like Pena did, but at the same time, I think that Raquel Pennington's experience, her activity, and just her style, she's good everywhere. And I think that Juliana Pena is more of a ground specialist. And I feel like if Pennington avoided the sub against Mayra Bueno Silva, I don't know if I see her getting subbed by Juliana Pena. I think Mayra Bueno Silva might have a better submission game. So I'd be very interested to see how Pena could deal with that, and if Pena would be the one actually winning those ground exchanges. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, and that's definitely a very fair assessment. But I think this fight's going to come down to, can Juliana Pena keep it on the feet, and she avoid Pennington's wrestling? And if
Mm.
he can do that, I think an early finish from Pena is not out of the question. And
Ooh.
just think simply put that Pena is the better fighter, and she probably knows that she should be the champion at this point, considering that Nunes is retired. But it's definitely a much bigger fight now, considering that Pennington is now the new champion, and kind of freshens up the division. And
I mean, Pena was already talking about their time on Tough together when they were on Tough together,
yep,
Juliana Pena and Raquel Pennington. Pena's
right.
already bringing up how apparently Raquel Pennington was bullying her on Tough and how she was taking her leftover food and talking trash about her with other girls. So there's definitely a buildup here. There could be some hype behind this fight, most definitely.
For sure, for sure. But I'm more than definitely looking forward to it, and we don't fully know the schedule, past June. But if you were to think of potentially when this fight could take place, realistically, when could you see this happening, and where could you see this happening? Because I think the UFC has a lot of options given the schedule that they have right now. I certainly don't think this headlines a pay per view, but it is definitely a very worthy co-main event. That's for sure.
It is a very worthy co-main event, and depending on how soon Raquel Pennington wants to or can get back in there, maybe they think about this fight for the Brazil card in May on May 4th,
Yeah, and
the one that
yeah,
Alex Pereira is supposed to headline. I could easily see them making this a co-main on that, but if not, I'd probably say this might be a fight that they could potentially use on International Fight Week as a third title fight on a big card potentially.
that would make a lot of sense to me. I think whatever pay per view they put it on, people would be excited. But I think if you were to ask me right now, point blank, I would think that they would want this fight in the United States. But that's just me. I could be wrong. They obviously know the schedule is way better than we do, but that would be my early impression on that.
Okay, yeah,
Uh,
no, it definitely could be.
but yeah, just kind of moving down the rest of the card, we obviously had Neil Magny with a huge comeback win over Mike Malott in a fight that clearly looked like Magny was going to lose, and then all of a sudden he turned it around with a couple of minutes left in the third round and secured, without a doubt, his biggest win, and you could probably argue a couple of years. What
Yeah.
what did you think of the fight? Did you think that Mike Malott just got complacent? What do you think happened?
I mean, man, I thought Neil Magny could have definitely pulled off this upset before the fight happened. But if you told me he was going to pull off that upset after what happened in the first two rounds, I would have called you crazy. I was shocked that Neil Magny was able to come back like that and get the finish in round three because he was going to lose on the scorecards if it hit there. With 15 seconds left in that round, I mean, I can't believe that he really just was able to gas Mike Malott out and finish him in that late into the fight. I mean, Mike Malott definitely has to work on his cardio. He looked amazing in the first two rounds, but it was obvious in that third round that Magny's veteran and cardio just abilities shined, and they won him that fight.
Yeah, I mean, and that's one of those things where the scorecards are never safe until they're actually read, and I
Yep.
think that's one of those fights where that exact scenario played out as such. Um, Given where Magny was sitting in the division, and given what the rankings will more than likely look like later this week, what do you think is the next worthy challenger for him, considering that 170 is so deep?
That's a really good question. I I mean, who hasn't he fought at 170? That's the thing. I mean, Magny's fought. I mean, it seems like everyone he could have at 170 at this point. But if I had to throw a name out there, I'd probably I'd probably maybe go Kelvin Gastelum because Kelvin Gastelum seems like he's going to stay down at 170 now after the Sean Brady fight. So I think a Kelvin Gastelum Neil Magny rematch would be fun.
Yeah, that's definitely interesting. Yeah, him. I would say a fight. I would say him. I would say a fight between him and Luke would be interesting.
Ooh,
A match between him and Shavkat would be interesting, and depending on how well Ian Gary performs over the next few months, I think that rematch could be very enticing because I think when he changes his game plan, he wins that fight. But definitely welterweight is super deep for
yeah,
sure.
very deep, very deep. One of the deeper weight classes. People don't understand how everyone talks about lightweight and bantamweight, but welterweight definitely has some good names down that list.
For sure. So the final two fights on the main card of UFC 297 saw um Chris Curtis knocking up Marc Andre Barrio. This fight was not surprising. Just very quickly, what did you think of Chris Curtis's performance? And what do you think is next for MAB? Because this was a very crushing loss, and one that I'm sure, considering that he fought in front of his home country, that he was not expecting to have.
I mean, it's tough because not a lot happened in this fight. I feel like this fight was very, very timid. Both guys didn't really push the pace. Both guys didn't do much within the fight, and I feel like the decision it could have went either way just because of the little amounts of activity. I do feel that Curtis edged it, but I don't think it was a really impressive performance from either man. I would have liked to see a better fight from both guys. I think that Chris Curtis probably probably takes a little bit of time off only because he just hasn't actually no. I think Chris Curtis probably fights again soon. Chris Curtis probably will fight again really soon because of how much time he took off before this fight. But I think Marc Andre Barrios would probably take some time off just because it, he just needs to refine his game a little bit more. It's just he's well rounded and he's a good fighter, but it's just like he can't seem to get it done in the big moments, and it's something he needs to work on, in my opinion.
Yeah, that's very well said. And then we got to the main card opener, which Dana White, I think, mistakenly called the least fun fight that anybody's ever seen. We had Movsar Evil taking on Arnold Allen in a fight that I thought Arnold Allen was gonna win, and he nearly had it if it wasn't for those knee strikes to a rounded opponent, which for those of you who don't know, Canada uses the old rules, which
Hmm.
is why Mark Goddard had to halt the fight, give him a hard warning, and the fight continued. But his for sure was a coming up party for Evil. I actually thought this was one of the most entertaining fights of the night, and really, I think it could go into either guy. And to me, contrary to what White said, I actually felt that both of these guys left it all out in the octagon. It was almost like Arnold Allen brought the fight to Mobsar, and Mobsar brought the fight to him. I thought it was a very, very evenly matched scrap. What did you think?
I completely agree. I don't know what Dana White was talking about when he said that this was a boring fight that no one liked. I loved that fight, and I know a lot of other people that very much enjoyed watching a high level technical fight like that. Arnold Allen looked great. Mavsar looked great. Both guys looked about as good as they could have, in my opinion, and one of them had to lose. That's just how these fights happen sometimes. I mean, I don't disagree with the decision, but I wouldn't have been mad if Arnold Allen got the nod. Both guys were able to implement their game plans. Both guys had success throughout the fight. And I don't think either guy should be disappointed. I just kind of feel for Arnold Allen because it's back-to-back losses after a 10-0 start in the UFC. And he put up a great fight against Max Holloway and could have definitely got the nod here. So I just think that Arnold Allen got a bad end of the stick in his past couple fights, but Movsar Evloev, man, he could be fighting for that title next. He looks great, and I know he doesn't have many finishes in the UFC, but if you keep beating all the best guys, they're gonna have to give you the title shot eventually. Same thing with Bilal Muhammad. So, what did you think, Zan?
Oh, I just thought it was an outstanding fight, and I thought for anyone that had never seen Mobsar before, I think he showed fully what he was capable of, and that he definitely should be in that mix for a title shot later
Mhm.
this year, which leads me to believe he's gonna get he's gonna get another big step up in competition at some point, and I actually think he's more than ready, in my opinion, to take on the loser of versus Deporia, and I know it's a very bold statement, but if you look at side by side the matchup that he and Taporia could bring, assuming that they could put that fight together. I think it has fireworks written all over it. Because Ilya, Ilya is gonna bring it, trying to take his head off, and the Mufsar is gonna try to pull out the biggest upset of his career. So I think featherweight has a lot to be very excited about. That's what I think.
I completely agree. I think that Movsar could potentially even get the next title shot, but if not, a Movsar Topuria fight in general, I mean, that was booked a couple years ago and never happened. And now they'd fight each other at the top of the weight class. I mean, you can't write stories better than that. You know what I mean? It's just, it'd be a perfect matchup, in my opinion. Perfect matchup.
You can for sure. And for those of you who feel like we've skipped it, we will get to who we think Dricus du Plessis is going to fight next in a little bit, as well as Sean Strickland. But off the heels of the UFC 297 recap is probably the biggest controversy in the MMA world this past week, and that was Sean Strickland's comments toward a Canadian reporter earlier this week at the UFC 297 Media Day. If you guys missed it, Sean Strickland was asked by a MMAfighting.com Canadian reporter named Alexander Lee about some comments he had made, as you could say, disparaging the LGBTQ community, and to which Sean Strickland was very defensive over why those questions were being asked, and it created one of the most viral videos in sports this year. I think as they checked the video, it had over 7 million views. But this is something that I think is very interesting, because for those of you who know how the UFC operates, is that they don't really censor a lot of their fighters and what they say and what they can't say. So I think overall, this entire incident is very interesting from several angles. Number one, from a journalistic perspective, Alexander Lee can obviously ask any question he wants. He's a member of the media, or for Sean Strickland can say whatever he wants in response. That's how these on the record conversations work. But I think where people seem to be not fully understanding what happened here is that, and you and I both know this, being on the other side, but you go to these media days and you have to really feel the vibe of the room, and you have to kind of know, like, what questions do you feel like would be the most appropriate to ask. And I've watched this media day, or this clip now, a couple of times to see like any of the questions before it, if any of this was going to come up. And from what I can recall, none of these questions even remotely came up in terms of the fact of him asking Sean about this. So when this exchange happened initially, I was very confused as to what was transpiring, because I thought that this was a follow-up to what somebody had previously asked, and it didn't seem that way. So I guess my feeling towards this is, did Sean Strickland act in a very unprofessional manner? Yes. But on the other side of that, to me, you should know as a member of the media, if you're accredited at one of Sean Strickland's press conferences, or quite frankly any other fighter's press conferences, just doing a little bit of research and kind of knowing, what are these fighters' tendencies and what it makes them tick. We obviously know that Sean Strickland is not the most politically correct person in the world. So really, my overarching point in saying all of this is, was Sean Strickland wrong to disparage Alexander Lee? Absolutely. Did he have every right to ask why he was being questioned about it? I would say yeah. Yeah.
In my opinion, Zan, I'm gonna have to side with you here. I just think that there's a time and place. There's a time and place for questions, and that question at that magnitude of an event and that press conference, it's just not right. You gotta know to hype up the fight. You gotta ask questions that fighters are gonna answer with a good answer. That's not a good answer, and it just caused a lot of controversy and problems. He knew who he was talking to. He knew who Sean Strickland was, and I don't know if he necessarily thought he'd get that kind of reaction, and that's what he want. I'm not really sure, but there's just a time and a place. If you were to ask Sean that question privately, or In a one-on-one interview, that's a completely different scenario, and it's a very appropriate question for something like that. But at the press conferences for the fights, I mean, it's just not the time and not the place. But with that said, Alexander had every right to ask whatever question he wanted, and I
It's
do
true.
think Strickland should have handled it a lot better. And I think that the problem lies with Sean Strickland not handling the question better, because if he just simply said next question, move on, and just kept going that way, we
No
wouldn't be
one,
talking we wouldn't be talking about this right now.
right, 100%. And I think what else is interesting about this too is, as we both know, ESPN is obviously the main American television partner for the UFC, and to hear them, not really have a comment or a crisis management plan or anything like that, like you would get in other sports, to me was very interesting and
Mhm.
also very concerning in a way, because I think if this were to happen in any of the four major sports, it would have been a media outcry,
Mhm.
and think I think quite frankly ESPN could have done a little bit of a better job just kind of taking a stance on it, and to hear that they didn't take a stance, they kind of let the UFC handle that.
Yep.
This kind of shows to me where the balance of power lies between the UFC and ESPN. Because to me, if it was any other sport, I think it would have been handled a lot differently.
Yeah, it
So
definitely would have been handled differently in almost any other sport. I think that just the UFC being what the UFC is makes the ESPN look at them differently and treat them a little bit differently in terms of how they're ran and what things can be said at places like that. But also, there was questions asked to Dana White after the press conference about this very topic, about Sean Strickland having his outburst and what he said. And basically, all Dana said was, I don't keep my guys on a leash. They can freedom of speech, they can talk what they want. And yeah, that's basically what Dana does. He gives his guys freedom of speech, and rightfully so. But I just wanted to know what you thought about Dana's comments, Sam.
yeah, well, I mean, it's very different than what he said 10 years ago when he addressed and when Fox was a known commodity in the MMA space. So I think he sort of doubled down on his 2014 comments, which is very interesting to see that his whole stance has changed on that. But
Mhm.
watching several Dana interviews and scrums, that isn't a surprise. I think that's part of the reason why the sport is as big as it is because it has sort of like a no filter um type of thing. Have there been things where a line has been crossed, like this incident and like other incidents? Yeah, I absolutely do. I think that Strickland should have been punished a little bit for the things that he said? Absolutely. Do I think the UFC should have gone as far as kicking him of the card? No. Oh wait, that seems crazy.
Yeah.
Most of the people who were gonna watch UFC 297 were gonna tune in to Sean Strickland anyway. You mean to tell me that now is because he has an opinion that maybe somebody else doesn't like? And quite frankly, I didn't necessarily agree with it either. But you
Hmm.
mean to tell me that because he has an opinion and that people don't seem to like, he can no longer compete? That's like someone on one NFL team accusing an opponent's player that they're going to play that week of something that's true, and all of a sudden the NFL finds out about it and postpones the game. They're not gonna do that.
No, no, they're not going to do that. And it wouldn't make sense to do that. I don't understand why that would even be a question, because all Strickland was asked about was past comments. You know what I mean? He added on to those past comments and said some more stuff. But these are comments he's already made in the past. It's not like this is some new thing we found out, that Sean Strickland was against the whole LGBTQ community and everything. This is stuff we knew. So to think that this fight would ever be canceled because of that, no, never.
No way. Absolutely not. Did it cause me to lose respect for Sean Strickland as a person? A little bit. Yeah,
Little bit.
absolutely. But am I gonna sit here? Am I gonna sit here and say that? Am I gonna sit here and say that he can't be Sean Strickland for a reason? No. Oh wait, I think that's what makes Sean Strickland in some people's eyes a villain, and
Yeah.
in some people's eyes a hero. I mean,
Yeah.
to see the amount of people that were supporting him after that was pretty astonishing. And I think you only get that reaction from the MMA crowd, considering that this sport in so many more ways than one is still considered the wild west. And I
Yep.
think it's something to just monitor. And I think as long as Dana is the UFC president, I don't think you're going to see any of that unfiltered stuff go away anytime soon. And also, for those of you who think that they should have done more about it, or that he should have been kicked off the card or anything, the other solution is to not cover it. That's what all say. That's what all say that. And then again, I'm not in no way am I defending any of the things that he said, but just either just either you can take away something from someone based on a difference of opinion. To me is just ridiculous. So
Yeah, I completely agree, Zain. I completely agree. But let's get into Dricus du Plessis and his next opponent, because he won this middleweight title, and now there's a lot of talk about who he'll fight next. Seems like there's one clear option here, and it seems to be the former champion Israel Adesanya. That was the fight that was supposed to take place in September when Sean Strickland pulled off the upset. Dricus knocked out Robert Whittaker in July and didn't want to fight 2 months after that fight. So the UFC gave Sean Strickland to Izzy, not thinking it was going to be a problem, thinking Israel would it was just a stepping stone for Israel, basically. And Strickland pulled off, I mean, one of the greatest upsets of all time, and ruined the Adesanya du Plessis fight. But with Dricus winning the title again now, it seems like we're going to be able to get that Dricus versus Adesanya fight. Do you think it happens at UFC 300? And what is your prediction for that fight?
yeah, so as I was kind of alluding to earlier, I kind of said there was one fight that we couldn't wait to get to. This is exactly the fight. I think that the build up to this fight is already there. That's obvious. You had Adesanya hinting that he was going to be out for several years, or maybe until 2026 or 2027 or something ridiculously crazy like that. So now I think that now that Dricus is the champion, and given that Adesanya just gave the thumbs up on social media a couple of days ago, and several other tweets that are going around, I think it's more than likely that this fight makes all the business sense in the world. In terms of the second part of the question, do I think that it get it done for UFC 300? Absolutely, because this is the only main event to me that makes a ton of sense. And I think Ariel Helwani said it best earlier this week on his most recent edition of the MMA Hour. Whenever you think that the UFC has maybe lost a step, or maybe can't figure out the one main event that's going to tip the fans over the edge, everything seems to always work out.
You're right. That's true.
It's sure enough, according
Very
to
true.
the unofficial script, Sean Strickland loses to the dream middleweight title fight that we couldn't get for 7 months is now potentially back on. And this is exactly what 90% of the MMA community wanted, and this is what we're gonna get now. So
I know, and it seems crazy because so many people are complaining about du Plessis winning, but I think they're forgetting the fact that him and Adesanya is a massive fight. It is a massive fight. There is so much hype that the UFC put into it, so much hype that both fighters put into it, and I feel like it's a fight that needed to happen. So I'm happy that it is happening for a championship.
And I'm gonna make a bold statement and say that this is the biggest middleweight title fight since Anderson Silva versus Chael Sonnen 2 in 2012.
Wow. I think I might have to agree. I mean, I think the only one that would fairly come close would be Izzy winning the title the first time against, oh no, not Izzy winning the title. Alex Pereira winning the title the first time over Israel Adesanya, or maybe that rematch. But those were some big fights, but this one might even be bigger.
I think so too. And you had asked me about an early prediction.
Mm-hmm.
I think Adesanya finishes him in 4, but I think it's an absolute stand-up war and a slugfest. And I think whoever catches who first is gonna win the fight.
I like that.
That's what That's what I think. And it's going to be one of those fights where there's going to be zero feeling out as whatsoever. The second that fight starts, those two are just going to start hellaciously throwing at each other. That's what I think. They're gonna throw into someone at just somebody else, and the other guy falls. It's gonna be an absolute war of attrition. And if this fight is made at UFC 300, presumably, or at least we would hope at some point this week, I think that the hype level for UFC 300 is going to go from a 5 to like a 15 because everyone's going to be excited. We'll get into more of the UFC 300 fights that were announced a week. You can go in a little bit, but if this could somehow top the card, I think that there would be a lot of very, very happy hardcore MMA fans for sure. And I think that if this fight gets made, I think that Vegas will be the place to be the weekend of April 13th, and it might be the biggest mid-April weekend in the history of Las Vegas. You never know.
Yeah, I mean, it'd be a great birthday present for me. I would have no complaints. So I would definitely love to see that fight on UFC 300.
For sure. Absolutely. We also had more breaking news outside of the UFC. It is official in Saudi Arabia. PFL's champions versus Bellator champions. It is happening. And sealed, delivered on pay-per-view, ESPN Plus and digital partnership at the top of the bill. And looking at this card, it is absolutely stacked. What are your early impressions of this champion versus champion format? It's a little bit unfortunate that that the UFC isn't on one side on one side of this equation because that would make things a whole lot more interesting. But this is pretty good too. What do you think? What do you think of it?
I think it's great. I mean, I think the PFL needed to put on an event like this after the purchase of Bellator just to get the hype around everything, man. I mean, there was a lot of questions on if the PFL would be able to deliver what they promised with the roster, with the buying of the roster of Bellator. And I think that they have with this card. I mean, it's a beautiful card from top to bottom. They have multiple champion versus championship fights, big names. I mean, it's great. But then, of course, just days after it's announced earlier today, Magomed Karamov is announced out versus Jason Jackson with Ray Cooper stepping in, and the card has already taken a massive hit in one of its champion versus championship fights.
For sure. I mean, do you think that waters down the quality of the card at all, or do you still think the card's good?
I sadly do, because Magomed Karamov versus Jason Jackson was one of my most anticipated fights coming into this card. And with it now being Jason Jackson versus Ray Cooper, it definitely loses most interest I had in it. I think Jason Jackson will beat Ray Cooper, but even if he doesn't, the hype on this fight will just not be the same.
What do you think is, besides that fight, what is one fight that you're absolutely looking forward to the most? For me, it's that Impa Kasaganai versus Johnny Eplin fight that does it for me. I think that's a very, very, very interesting and high level fight to where you can flip a coin, and I still don't know who wins that.
I would have to say that Jesus Pinedo versus Patricio Pitbull is another one of the bigger matchups that I'm very excited about, just due to the fact that Pitbull hasn't looked the same these past couple years, and Pinedo's been as hot as he's ever been. If Pinedo can knock off Pitbull, the amount of hype that he would get on his name is just going to be crazy.
Agreed.
So I can't wait to see what happens in that fight, and I actually think I might favor Pinedo to win.
Yeah, it's definitely a very interesting pay-per-view portion of the card. But for those of you who don't know, the early card begins at noon Eastern on ESPN News and ESPN Plus. This is February 24th, by the way. And then the main card, which is only on pay-per-view, begins at 3 p.m. Eastern, noon Pacific, topped with the main event, which is the heavyweight championship between Renan Ferreira, obviously representing the Professional Fighters League, and Ryan Bader representing Bellator. Tom and I will have way more on this Bellator versus PFL mega event, as it is being dubbed, as it gets with a closer. And thankfully for both promotions, they're not really competing with the biggest of UFC cards that same night.
Nope.
The UFC will be in Mexico City, but they are not competing against the pay-per-view. So all eyes on the MMA world be on this fight, and it should be very, 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 very interesting for sure.
And I'm pretty sure both cards have a different start time. So I think MMA fans will be able to watch both cards at different times throughout the day and not have to really worry about them conflicting. So I think the PFL did a great job at making sure that there wasn't going to be competition and that all eyes would be on their card. What do you think about it being on pay-per-view? I forgot to ask that. It's definitely a situation where I personally would pay for it, but do you think a lot of the casual fans are going to pay for a pay-per-view like that?
No, because it's not a traditional pay-per-view start time. I would say, no, that's number one, and number two, just the uncertainty, or obviously you mentioned that injury that obviously he took place too. Just the uncertainty of potentially more fights falling out that could water down the card even more. And are people willing to pay another $75-$80 when on the same day, the prior Saturday, you have UFC 298 in Anaheim and you have Fury versus Usyk in boxing on the other side of the world? So are people really willing to shelve out in the United States $160+ to watch 3 pay-per-views in 2 consecutive weekends? I don't know.
I would say probably not, but I'm hoping they do because this card does deserve a lot of attention. It deserves as much attention as a UFC pay-per-view, if you want my honesty. This is a high-level card with a lot of high-level fighters, some of the best in the world.
I agree. You could argue, I hate to compare it to this, but you could argue when before they went away, when Affliction had a major pay-per-view that had all of these stars on it from like 08 or 09, you could argue that it is to that level where people are willing to pay for another pay-per-view product that isn't named the UFC. So it'll definitely be a very interesting experiment, if you will, to see how it works. The one thing I don't like, and this is maybe us being biased given what we're able to physically cover in person, what bums me out is that this card is not in the United States, because if it was, I think that there would be a lot more media interest in people wanting to cover it.
That's going to be that was one of the mistakes by the PFL, and it's not even a mistake because the only reason they were able to buy Bellator was because of the money they got from Saudi Arabia and the investors there. So you obviously know they were going to have some cards there, but at the same time, a lot of the media that would be covering this event in person are going to have to be covering this event online, or may just not cover it at all. And I think that the media definitely would have helped propel this card up, and without most media members being there, it definitely will take a hit.
For sure. So kind of bouncing off the PFL versus Bellator announcement, we also had the announcement of PFL Europe returning to the World Run here, which has obviously been, kind of the version of the White's Contender Series. We have a couple of locations and ones for PFL Europe in 2024. We're going to have events in Paris, France, Newcastle, England, and Glasgow, Scotland, to name a few. And I know how much you closely follow the PFL and everything that they do over there. What do you think of the whole Europe concept? Do you think it works? Do you think that the PFL event that was in France a couple months ago was successful? And do you think that if done the right way, PFL Europe can continue to remain a success?
Yes, yes, and yes. I think that the PFL is actually doing everything right when it comes to what they're doing in Europe. They're traveling to different countries that really don't get as much attention from a lot of bigger organizations. And they just bought Bellator's roster, and Bellator had a big presence over in Ireland and some of those countries. With the combination of PFL holding their own events and now having Bellator, I really think that they're going to be able to break into this European market and make a move. And you've seen it already in Paris because of the Cedric Doumbé. And now he has a fight announced for this PFL Paris card. And I will tell you, Zain, the guy he is fighting, Basangor Chamzudinov, he is one of the best prospects in MMA today. The fact that they were able to make this fight was incredibly done by the PFL. And especially the main event, this Paris card. I mean, I don't know if they could have really gotten a better fight to headline this card.
Would you argue, given the quality of that fight, that this has a chance to be the biggest MMA event in the history of France?
Yes. I would almost guarantee that it is, actually. Just because both men are from France. One is probably the most hyped up prospect out of France since Cyril Gane. and the other one is Cedric Doumbé. And we saw what happened at Doumbé's last fight in
Right.
France. I mean, come on. He had that arena jumping, man. That was incredible to watch for someone's major MMA promotional debut to have that kind of hype behind you. I think I'd be shocked if this was not the biggest event in French MMA history.
And you could also argue, I don't really know if they do this over in France, but with the way that this fight has a chance to be hyped up over there, you could very well see some very long lines of people waiting to get in for several hours before the event starts. Because I think if the PFL does it the right way, you're going to get a flock of people either traveling in to go see that fight, or local people from the region that want to come see that fight. Because to me, a fight between those two of that magnitude, considering where they are in their careers, to me, that is just absolute must-see TV, 1000%.
Yeah, and like you said, like where they are in their careers, they're both at very similar places of their careers. I know Shamsudinov is a bit younger than Doumbé, but in terms of the amount of fights, they're about in the same place, and I really think that they made this fight at the perfect time. They capitalized perfectly. And then they also announced these events in Newcastle and Glasgow, which are massive. I'm not sure exactly who they'll have on those, but I know Stevie Ray talked about wanting to fight in Glasgow, Scotland before he retired, and he said that he retired because it didn't look like it was going to happen, but now here we are with the PFL event in Glasgow, and Stevie Ray says he's interested. So it looks like they're really going to be putting some good fights on these PFL Europe cards, man. I'm very much looking forward to seeing what they can do here.
Yeah, and I think it'll be cool for those fans who are newer to the PFL that will understand the full structure of how the PFL works. Because to me, and if they're going to do this the way I think they are, PFL Europe to me could be, what a step up from the PFL Challenger Series it'll look like. Well, now you have kind of these tiers where it's like the PFL Challenger Series, the PFL Europe, the PFL playoffs, these PFL champion versus champion cards in the PFL Super Fight division. And to me, if done the right way, you have a very competitive number 2 promotion on the market in a promotion that could definitely make some headway for the next several years, considering what this new era of the UFC might look like in a couple of years when Dana eventually decides to leave. So the PFL is definitely investing. That's for sure. They're definitely putting a lot of eggs in basket. But if this works, to me, Don Davis is an all-time. And he will be thanked by tons of people if his whole plan actually comes to fruition by signing the biggest stars on the planet and making all of these fellow aspects larger than life characters. It could end up being a wonderful, wonderful venture for him. So it'll be very interesting to see what the PFL does moving forward, and it will definitely be an unbelievable end of winter, early spring time frame for them. Because to me, I think that the sky's the limit for the promotion if they can do it the right way. I really do.
I completely agree. If this is done the right way, I mean, and it looks like they have been. That's the thing. It looks like they are making the right moves lately. For a bit, things were quiet and everyone was a little scared. And now it seems like they've just been making good move after good move. And I'm really looking forward to seeing how the PFL can jump on this opportunity that they had to buy the Bellator roster and make themselves a real number 2.
Now, I guess kind of bouncing from that, they have an event in Paris, France. Obviously, they have Francis Ngannou as an ambassador for PFL Africa. Do you think after the Anthony Joshua fight is when we'll finally get to see Francis compete in MMA again? And you think that if and when he does compete in MMA, it's against one of these other international stars, or potentially that could come off of one of these cards that could actually give Francis a challenge that people would be interested in?
I'm gonna have to say I don't see Francis fighting anytime too soon. Maybe the end of the year, if anything. But I think that if he were to come back, he would be facing the winner of the PFL versus Bellator championship heavyweight championship fight, Renan Ferreira or Ryan Bader. I mean, I think that just makes the most sense. Yeah, it's like the final boss. You know what I mean? Like Bader and Ferreira fight, and then whoever wins has to go on to the final boss, which is Francis waiting in the wings. And then I feel like that's a massive fight, especially with whoever winning getting whatever hype they get behind them. I feel like Francis versus them would be a massive fight.
For sure. So speaking of money, speaking of contract, all of that sorts of thing, let's move on to our next story because it is being revealed by former UFC heavyweight and light heavyweight champion Daniel Cormier that his teammate, former UFC lightweight champion Khabib Nurmagomedov, who walked away from the sport of mixed martial arts in 2021, was supposedly turned down by the UFC $40 million to return to the promotion. We don't know if this is in any sort of way related to UFC 300, but Daniel Cormier was doing a podcast with Ben Askren where this was revealed, and apparently Khabib is still sticking to his word. He's still not going to fight, given that his dad has now passed away within the last several years, and he's that if his dad was not doing well health-wise, which he obviously wasn't, he would retire, and it looks like he's sticking to that. I guess a few questions that I have right off the top. $40 million is a lot of money. There's an argument to be made, or was a statement made a couple months ago, that the UFC attempted to offer Francis Ngannou the most money that he's ever been paid to stay in the promotion. A similar story was told when they failed to sign Fedor Emelianenko and they could not get M1 Global to agree to the same terms that M1 Global was looking for. So when you look at this number 40 million kind of from a bird's eye view, given other failed UFC signings and stuff like that, do you think this is believable? Or do you think that in any sort of way the UFC discussed a number even remotely close to this? And you think that they tried to do everything they could to get Khabib back to either fight Conor or to fight one of these other big stars in a massive super fight that nobody saw coming?
I think they definitely tried. I think that UFC definitely made attempts to go out there and try to get Khabib to come back for probably as much money as they could offer, but I don't think that it was $40 million. That number is just so high. I don't know if we've ever had an MMA purse ever get that anything close to that, honestly.
No.
And Francis Ngannou, like you brought up his situation, what Dana said was $10 million that they offered him. And I'm pretty sure Francis confirmed that it was a $10 million offer. Is Khabib 4 times more valuable to them than Francis was?
I don't think so.
I don't think so.
I don't think so, because if you look at his career, he only, and this is no disrespect to his career at all, 29-0 is 29-0. It's obviously a very impressive feat. He did the Floyd Mayweather MMA style impersonation by winning every single fight on his MMA record. But if you think about it, later on in his career, he only fought the bigger names later on in his career. He only fought, the Connors later on. He only fought the Portuguese later on. He only fought all of these guys later on in his career when he was actually a notable name. So
yeah,
for me to say that he was 4 times more valuable in Fedor when Fedor had dominated an entire division for a 10-year span and beat like 4 or 5 former UFC heavyweight champions. I can't remember what the number was. It was some astronomical number like that. I don't know if I can believe either myself that it was 40 million. It was definitely in the 10s and 20s, but 40 to me is jarring. Unless they were,
I completely agree.
Unless they were offering him a fight where they were like, oh yeah, if you win in this fight, you win 2 belts instead of what?
It's 2 fights in one night. You have to have a tournament. No, but I agree. I think 20 million would be the max amount of money that they offered him. I don't think they would have went higher than that. I don't see how they could have went higher than that. And I mean, I know DC is Khabib's teammate and everything, so he's gonna probably pump the numbers up a bit, maybe tell a little bit of an exaggeration here or there. But I just don't see any way that the $40 million number is legit.
Now, if you were to guess, do you think they tried to get him to come back so he could fight Conor? And because that's what Dana always wanted was the rematch that he never got.
I mean, really, honestly, I would say no. But if they did offer him a lot of like tens of millions of dollars, what other fight would it be for? Seriously, right. He's not gonna fight Islam. No. It wouldn't be a Gaethje or Poirier rematch. So no. I think it would have to have been the Conor fight. Most definitely. I don't see any other fight where they could justify paying Khabib $20 million, even 40. So yeah, it had to be.
Well said. So do you think in any sort of way the super fight the super fight that Dana hinted on the Nelk Boys podcast that he tried to put together, do you think that in any sort of way Khabib was a part of this proverbial puzzle?
Now that you mention it, it definitely he could have been. It's definitely a possibility. I'd probably say yeah. I'd probably say yeah. Now that you point it out, but
Now
I'm not 100% sure.
if the super fight word was being thrown around, do you think it would have been Conor McGregor, or do you think it would have been somebody like George St. Pierre on the other side?
I think the Conor rematch would definitely make sense. I mean, the GSP fight would be massive too, but I don't think GSP is coming back. I
No.
mean, I don't think Khabib is coming back either. But I'd say GSP is so far gone at this point that if he comes back, all it would do is hurt his reputation.
Oh, I think so too. But yeah, that's definitely a wild story. So it looks
Yeah,
like any of the Khabib UFC 300 rumors, those have been
not
squashed.
gonna happen.
Any of the Brock Lesnar UFC 300 rumors, those have been squashed. And any of the Ronda Rousey
Yep.
UFC 300 rumors for the moment have also been squashed too. So I think the UFC is down to very few options, and we'll see what they end up doing. Kind of going away from the UFC a little bit and going to some of the or women's boxing side of things. We had Cris Cyborg, obviously a former UFC champion in her own right, winning her second boxing match of her very young career in a very, very devastating fashion. This was a knockout that I did not see coming. I'm pretty sure I figured that she would win her fight, but not in the fashion that she did. And I'll be quite honest, I did not see the entire fight. I only saw the clip of the knockout, and it got nastier and nastier every single time I watched it.
So Zen, I don't think you need to watch the full fight. It was a first round knockout. You saw what the knockout looked like, and I would assume that Cyborg just did what she wanted to that girl. I mean, I hate to say it, but the girl was 2-0. You know what I mean? She doesn't seem like the highest level boxer. It seems like
No.
Cyborg set up. Oh, did you saw the clip? You Cyborg set up that right hand. I mean, it was so obvious Cyborg was about to launch at her with a right hand, and the girl just stood there and let it happen, and then got put face first into the mat. Like it was just bad, man. Like definitely a great win for Cyborg, and it's great that she can go to like other sports and get highlight reel knockouts like that. Like it's nothing. But then again, I don't think very highly of the whole situation because of her opponent, and it's a great win, but I don't think too much of it.
No, I don't think too much of it either. And I think that hopefully if it can come to terms that the dream fight between Cyborg and Kayla Harrison and eventually happens, I think that we've been patiently waiting for it. And if this fight doesn't happen, you can put it into the category of the greatest MMA fights to never
It
take
never
place.
happened.
So hopefully this was more so just a tune-up fight for her to stay active, because I think now she really needs to focus on figuring out, okay, what can I do with the PFL for
Yep.
the right price to come back, because I think everyone would want to see her and Kayla Harrison, given the build up, given the backstory, given how much Kayla Harrison feels that she's better than her. I think that there's so many unanswered questions about that fight that we need to see, and I think it would be a totally regrettable situation if we never end up getting a chance to watch that, because that is some high level women's MMA for sure. But given the boxing side, good for her. I'm glad that she's taken up another venture on the boxing front, and it'll be interesting to see what he does moving forward. And it's good for her to see that she's just as much of a beast at another combat sport as she is with MMA, because for those of you who forgot, until this past weekend, her hands are very, very lethal. So
Very, very lethal. I mean, Cris Cyborg, one of the greatest women MMA fighters of all time, maybe even the greatest woman MMA fighter of all time. She's incredible, and the fact that she's still getting it done in a different sport is just so crazy.
for sure. So kind of transitioning a little bit more over onto the regional side of things, and this was one that we wanted to talk about. We had a UFC Fight Pass card take place with us Friday. It was Unified MMA 55. It was also part of the Dana White Looking for a Fight YouTube series. And Pat, you were locked in on this card the entire night. What did you think of the card? Would you like to see more of this from UFC? You Fight Pass, and do you think it's good to see Dana go to these smaller shows to see kind of what these regional fighters have to see if they really have what it takes to make it to the UFC? Because I feel like whenever Dana says that he's going to one of these smaller cards, the hype for that card it's immense, knowing that knowing that the boss man is actually in attendance.
Well, I had known that this card was actually in the works for looking for a fight before it was actually announced. So I think that the promotion was gearing up to make a card that really gave Dana White what he wanted. And I love that. I love that when Dana White comes to town, these regional promotions are just going to put on a show and make sure that Dana White sees their best fighters. And I think that's what Unified MMA did. I think Mo Ado is an amazing fighter, Matteo Vogel, Mark Hume. I mean, there's a lot of guys that were on that card that ended up winning their fights that they deserve to be in front of Dana White. They deserve to have Dana see their fights and see what they're about. And they deserve the world to have their eyes on them because Dana was there. So I'm very happy. I think that UFC Fight Pass definitely should continue it. I wish they showed the prelims for this card. I don't know why they didn't show the prelims. That was something that slightly annoyed me. Only the main card was on Fight Pass, but I definitely think that the hype around these cards with Dana when he goes for looking for a fight, I mean, they're out of this world. And it got so many eyes on such a great card. I think that this should be continued for long into the future.
Oh, I think so too, and that just leaves me more excited to watch the episode because I'm curious to see to
Who got
watch
the contract.
well, not just to watch the contracts, but to watch Dana's reactions to these fights are just absolutely hilarious. So I can't wait to see. Yeah, I'm totally with you. This card was tremendous, and I hope that looking for a fight continues because if you really want a behind the scenes look on who Dana is really looking for to into his promotion, Dutch is very, very much exactly that. And for those of you who have never seen any of the previous episodes, I personally would highly recommend you to see them because they are just absolutely awesome. So I'm very glad he was able to make it out, and it's good to see Dana, support regional MMA, considering that, when he started this venture 6 or 7 when he started this venture 6 or 7 years ago, he kind of admitted that he wished that he would have gone back out on the road more, and he's actually been able to find some really good talent. So it's good to see that he's still trying to push it, and he's still out there on the grind and trying to sign the next great future prospect in the world of mixed martial arts, and it's very good to see.
So Zain, you were talking about the episodes for this show, but I mean, we're going to see some episodes for a new show coming out about Molly McCann and Paddy Pimblett, who get their own reality TV show on BBC. It's tracking their life inside and outside of the cage. I mean, I wasn't expecting this. I don't think you were. I don't think many people were either. No. I mean, great job, honestly, because Molly and Paddy are two fun people that really embody just like fun fighters. And they're a great duo. I love the move. I just wish it wasn't so late. Molly's lost a bit of her hype at this point, and I mean, Paddy's still there, but he's definitely lost some hype along the way too. I just wish they did this like a year or so ago, but I still think this is going to be honestly a pretty funny TV show.
Yeah, it's going to be a funny TV show for sure. It's obviously going to be good for the UK fans because that's who they're trying to target, and those two are definitely characters, and I'm excited to see when the show comes out, what actually transpires, and maybe this is like a what do you call it, like a billion or type show in the United States where all these people get followed around and you see the goofy stuff that they try to do and their day-to-day lives and everything they try to incorporate into being famous. It's definitely a very interesting concept, and this may sound not so popular, to the contrary, but I actually am more excited to watch this for Molly McCann than I am.
I agree. I'm with you there.
Paddy Pimblett, because personally, I think we know everything about Paddy Pimblett's personality. I don't think we really know much about Molly McCann outside of the whole Barstool relationship, so this show should be very interesting.
Well, from someone who's actually been lucky enough to have the chance to hang out with Molly one night at Bellator 300, she is a character. She is an amazing, fun person to be around, and I honestly can't wait to see what her life looks like in this TV show.
That's awesome. And speaking of major stars, we had a little bit of some downer news to end the show here. Dana White was asked at the UFC 297 post-fight presser about the status of Conor McGregor's long-awaited return to the UFC in a potential fight with Michael Chandler, and he put it very simply: "When we are ready to announce Conor McGregor's return and against who, we will let you know," which left everybody in a total panic that maybe Conor McGregor versus Michael Chandler won't happen. I am still going to go out on a limb and say it will happen. I think it's more so just about negotiations at this point and what card we're going to eventually do this on. But I think that, when it comes to Conor McGregor, they want to make it a special announcement, and I think that's why they've been keeping it under wraps for so long. What do you think?
I would have to agree. I think when Conor's fight gets announced, everyone will know about it. Most definitely, everyone will know that Conor McGregor is fighting, and I think they just got to wait for the one. They have to wait for the right time. But two, I just think that they're still working some things out there. I don't know if he'll end up fighting Chandler. I don't know what's going on. I'm pretty sure that Conor will return this year, but against who, I couldn't tell you. But they're definitely going to make it a point to make that announcement a very big deal.
Do you think it's going to be UFC 302 on International Fight Week, or do you think it's going to be a different date?
I think it might be a different date after some of the things we've heard, only because Dana's being a little too quiet about it in a sense. I feel like he would be saying like, "Oh, you'll hear Conor news soon." He'd at least be trying to hype it up a bit, but he said that he doesn't know when Conor's going to fight and that he'll let us know when he does. So I don't necessarily believe that he'll let us know immediately, but at the same time, I don't think that it'll be in June.
What do you think of him not really knowing when pressed about Conor McGregor's video with the red wine and the 188 pounds and the whole thing? It didn't really seem like Dana was clued in on the viral video that the whole world saw.
I don't understand how Dana wasn't aware of that video. I mean, it seems like everyone was aware of that video. I had some of my friends, like my personal friends, texting me like, "Hey man, like Conor McGregor's going to be back in June," like all this stuff. So, I mean, it feels like everyone saw that video. I don't know how Dana was the only one that missed it in the world. But
yeah, it's definitely very interesting. I'm gonna have to agree with you that Conor McGregor does fight later this year, but I personally think if it isn't against Michael Chandler, then the Ultimate Fighter season 31 was an absolute waste of time.
I could definitely see why you'd say that. We've had fighters be coaches before and not end up fighting, so it wouldn't be the worst thing. But I think all that hype built into that fight just goes away. I mean, come on, they put so much hype into that season of The Ultimate Fighter. I feel like no one even cared about the fighters. Sadly, it was all about Chandler and McGregor.
I know. So now that unfortunately it looks like that Conor McGregor won't be fighting on UFC 300. We actually have fights on UFC 300 that were announced this past week, which I guess you could say are actually some pretty good consolation prizes. So for the BMF title, we have Justin Gaethje versus Max Holloway. For UFC 300, this is obviously a future Hall of Famers fight, a legends fight in every sense of the word. There's no way this fight is awesome. I saw some people online saying, "Oh, Max Holloway's washed. He doesn't deserve this." I don't want to hear any of that slander. These guys are two of the most original lighter weight fighters that you'll get, and anyone and I'm just gonna put it bluntly: anyone who doesn't like this fight simply does not like the sport of MMA. Period. That's what I think.
I'd have to agree, man. I mean, I don't know how you could want more than this fight. I mean, it's been talked about, I feel like, for years now as a potential like big matchup to happen down the road. Holloway Gaethje. I mean, their styles would just clash so perfectly, I feel like. And I don't understand how anyone could not be excited about this fight. This is such a good fight. It's so high level. I mean, I know Gaethje was never the lightweight champion, but he's been one of the best lightweights in the world for so long now. And Max Holloway, I mean, how much better can you get than Max Holloway's resume? It's
You
just going to be
can't.
such an incredible fight.
For sure. Well, I guess you could say he was the lightweight champion, considering he was the interim champion briefly. But yeah, I totally understand what you're saying.
Yeah.
We also had another fight announcement as well, and we also had a bit of history in that fight announcement as Jim Miller became the first UFC fighter ever he's going to be competing. He competed on UFC 100, 200, or now 300. So congratulations to him, and he will be fighting another OG the sport and Bobby Green. There's no way that this fight isn't exciting either. That's for sure.
I mean, Jim Miller has a great ground game, and Bobby Green's has looked so improved throughout the last couple of years. And both men can go in there and just throw down, man. We've seen both these guys in how many wars throughout the years. I mean, just going back and forth and back and forth. I can't see a way that this fight isn't similar to that.
For sure. Well, UFC 300 is definitely very exciting. We are officially 86 days away from the event. Again, it's April 13th in Las Vegas, Nevada. You can pick that up on ESPN Plus pay-per-view, and as more fights are announced, me and Tom will go over the entire card as soon as it is revealed, but it is certainly being built up as a UFC event to remember. And with all that being said, that's going to do it for another edition of the MMA Outsiders again. And this was episode 68. Thanks again to Pat for filling in for Tom this week. Pat, you did a very excellent job. This was a wonderful discussion, and I think we have some great chemistry. Before we get out of here, we just wanted to remind you again, please like and subscribe. He shared the show across all social media platforms. You can find us at ETV Network on Facebook, Instagram, and X. And of course, you can find the show also on all of our podcast platforms, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, et cetera, wherever you get your podcasts. And for those of you who that prefer to listen to the audio only version, please come back over here and you can find the YouTube version of the podcast as well, as we are quickly approaching 700 subscribers. So every single subscriber helps as we continue to grow the network. And of course, I'm Zain Bando, and that's Pat Danna, whom I love to thank you again for tuning in into another edition of the MMA Outsiders. And we will see you back here next week, where the UFC schedule will be back up and running once again to be in the February and to kick off another UFC Fight Night card from Las Vegas. We'll see you guys then, and enjoy the rest of your week.
Thanks for having me, Zain.
You too.